What happens when you finally choose yourself above all else? Jung discovered something terrifying about people who make this choice. They don't just change their lives, they transform into something society fears. Today, I'm showing you the 3 dangers Jung warned about once you cross this line. Because choosing yourself isn't self-care, it's psychological warfare. Jung called it the integrated self. And here's what most people don't understand. The moment you truly choose yourself, you become dangerous. Not to innocent people, dangerous to every system that relied on your silence, every relationship that fed on your compliance, every person who benefited from your self-abandonment. But the real question is this: why does becoming your authentic self lead to isolation? And what are the 3 specific psychological dangers Jung documented once you make this choice? Let's find out. Jung's case files reveal a disturbing pattern. Patient after patient arrived at his clinic carrying the same wound. They were what Jung termed emotional shock absorbers, people who had spent their entire lives absorbing everyone else's pain. Alcoholic parents' rage, unfaithful partners' guilt, dysfunctional family members' chaos. They had become the designated dumping ground for everyone's unconscious content. These weren't weak people. Jung realized something that made his blood run cold. These patients hadn't been broken by abuse. They had been studying it. Every empath in his practice kept detailed mental records of every person who had ever hurt them. They knew their abusers' triggers, insecurities, and deepest fears. They had mapped emotional patterns with surgical precision. They had never used this knowledge, not once, until something pushed them past their breaking point. Jung wrote that the empath's mind is not a victim's diary. It is a strategist's war room, waiting for the moment of activation. And that moment always came. Jung called it the event. A profound betrayal by someone the empath had completely trusted and protected. Not just any betrayal, the kind that forces you to see every red flag you ignored, every warning sign you explained away. Every moment your intuition screamed danger while you chose to believe the best in someone. What happened next terrified everyone involved. These empaths didn't cry. They didn't rage. They didn't fall apart. They became unnaturally calm. Jung described it as the moment the victim realizes they've been playing chess while everyone else thought it was checkers. The transformation was permanent. These patients integrated their shadow. They stopped apologizing for seeing the truth. They stopped doubting their perceptions. They stopped sacrificing themselves to maintain other people's comfort. Jung watched as gentle, accommodating people became psychologically untouchable. Here's what made this transformation so disturbing. The integrated empath didn't lose their empathy. They became selectively empathetic, still deeply caring, but strategically protective of where that care flowed. They could still feel everything. They just stopped, letting everyone have access to everything they felt. Jung called this shadow integration under extreme duress. The empath's shadow wasn't evil. It was their suppressed intelligence, their silenced intuition, their denied strength, their right to boundaries. When they finally integrated these denied aspects, they became what Jung called psychologically complete. But here's where it truly dangerous. These transformed individuals could now read people with terrifying accuracy. They understood manipulation at a level that made them nearly omnipotent in social situations. They could have destroyed every person who had ever hurt them. They had the psychological ammunition. They knew exactly where to aim. Instead, they chose something more powerful. They simply removed toxic people from their lives and moved on. No drama, no revenge, no explanation. Just clean, surgical extraction of dysfunction from their psychological space. The people who had once walked all over them suddenly felt nervous in their presence. They couldn't explain why. These integrated empaths weren't aggressive or cruel, but everyone could sense something fundamental had changed. Jung identified what he called the predator's instinct. Manipulative people can sense when their usual tactics won't work. They avoid integrated empaths, like vampires avoid sunlight. This brings us to Jung's first danger, the danger of differentiated perception. When you choose yourself, you develop what Jung called superior function. You see through every social facade. You detect lies instantly. You feel the unconscious tensions in every room. You become a living mirror that reflects what others refuse to acknowledge in themselves. And society cannot bear to look into that mirror. Jung wrote that the individual who perceives too clearly threatens the collective agreements upon which social cohesion depends. Organizations, families, and societies function partly through collective unconscious agreements about what will and won't be acknowledged. The highly perceptive individual inadvertently violates these agreements simply by existing authentically. You walk into a room and immediately sense the depression behind forced smiles, the desperation beneath confident presentations, the collective shadow that groups unconsciously agree to ignore. You don't even have to say anything. Your presence alone disrupts the shared illusion. This creates what Jung called the curse of consciousness. You become an island of awareness in an ocean of unconsciousness. This isolation isn't just social, it's existential. You feel like you're living in a different reality from everyone around you. But the isolation is only the beginning of the danger. Because here's what Jung discovered that kept him awake at night. When you see others' unconscious contents clearly, you become a target for what Jung extensively documented as shadow projection. People unconsciously attack you for reflecting what they refuse to acknowledge in themselves. Jung wrote that nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment than the unlived life of the parent. But he discovered this principle extended to all relationships. When someone's shadow is reflected back through another person's clear perception, the unconscious mind has two choices: integrate the shadow or attack the mirror. Most people attack the mirror. Jung documented this pattern repeatedly in his clinical work. The person who sees clearly gets blamed for creating the problems they're merely observing. When these integrated individuals would gently suggest that someone seemed troubled, that person would explode at them for being negative or creating drama. When they'd express concern about obvious problems, they'd be accused of being judgmental or manufacturing issues where none existed. Jung realized this wasn't coincidence, it was psychological defense. But for most people, it's easier to attack the person reflecting their shadow than to examine what's being reflected. This creates what Jung called the scapegoat phenomenon. Highly perceptive individuals often become the designated problem in every group they enter, not because they cause problems, but because they reveal problems that already exist in the collective unconscious. Jung observed that the bearer of superior perception becomes the repository for all that the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself. This pattern explains why integrated individuals don't just feel misunderstood. They feel systematically targeted by a force they can't rationally explain. You're not paranoid. You're experiencing the collective unconscious organizing itself against consciousness. Every family has a scapegoat who gets blamed for the family's dysfunction. Every workplace has someone who becomes the problem employee despite doing nothing wrong. Every friend group has the person everyone subtly turns against. Often that person is simply the one who sees clearly and won't pretend otherwise. But Jung's most disturbing discovery was still to come. The third danger of choosing yourself: identity dissolution. Jung found that people who absorb unconscious contents from others can lose contact with their own authentic personality. They become so flooded with external psychological material that they can't distinguish between their own inner world and what they're absorbing from their environment. Jung called this participation mystique, a state where psychological boundaries dissolve and the individual becomes merged with collective unconscious contents. He wrote that the danger is not merely social exile but psychological annihilation, the complete loss of individual identity in favor of collective possession. This is why Jung considered the integration of superior perception not just therapeutically important, but psychologically urgent. Because unintegrated superior perception posed such dangers, Jung developed what he called the individuation process, a systematic approach to maintaining individual identity while developing conscious relationship with unconscious contents. Phase 1. Recognition and differentiation. Jung taught his highly perceptive patients to first recognize when they were absorbing psychological material that wasn't their own. He called this conscious discrimination, the ability to distinguish between authentic inner experience and unconsciously absorbed external content. Jung wrote that the first task is to establish what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Without this discrimination, there can be no individual development. The technique was simple but profound. Jung instructed patients to spend time in complete solitude daily, allowing absorbed material to settle so they could recognize their own authentic psychological voice. In silence, the noise of others' unconscious contents gradually quiets. What remains is your actual self. Phase 2. Shadow integration. Jung discovered that people who see others' shadows clearly often do so because they haven't integrated their own. The more you deny your own capacity for deception, selfishness, or cruelty, the more disturbed you'll be by seeing these qualities in others. Jung wrote that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but only if we have the courage to look inward rather than remaining focused outward. Shadow integration means acknowledging that you contain every human quality you observe in others. This doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a complete person who can see clearly without judgment. When you accept your own shadow, other people's shadows stop triggering you. You can observe dysfunction without being consumed by it. Phase 3. Conscious participation. The final phase involves what Jung called conscious participation in the collective unconscious, the ability to engage with others' psychological contents without being overwhelmed or losing your individual identity. Jung wrote that the individuated person can serve as a bridge between conscious and unconscious, helping to make the unconscious conscious in others without sacrificing their own psychological integrity. This requires developing what Jung called psychological containers, the ability to hold others' unconscious contents temporarily while maintaining awareness that they are not your own. You can help someone process their pain without making their pain your identity. Now we reach the climax, the moment of maximum danger. Because here's what Jung realized about integrated individuals. They possess extraordinary power. Power that could be used for manipulation, power that could destroy others, power that terrified Jung himself. These transformed empaths understand human psychology at a level that makes them nearly omnipotent in social situations. They can read people's deepest wounds within minutes. They know exactly what to say to help someone heal or to completely devastate them. They understand emotional dynamics better than most trained therapists. Jung's private notes reveal his amazement and his fear. He wrote that he had observed something beautiful and terrible. These individuals have become what every manipulator fears most. Someone who can see through them completely but no longer needs anything from them. The integrated individual has the psychological ammunition to wage war on everyone who ever hurt them. They could expose every hypocrite, destroy every manipulator, dismantle every toxic system, and they would be completely justified in doing so. But here's what made Jung's hands shake as he wrote his observations. These individuals chose not to use this power destructively. They could have become the very monsters they had studied. Instead, they simply removed toxic people from their lives and moved on. They chose wisdom over vengeance, integration over inflation, service over destruction. Jung realized he had witnessed the birth of what he called the integrated empath, someone with both the sensitivity to feel everything and the wisdom to choose what deserved their energy. This is the resolution of the terrifying transformation. The choice is not to see less. The choice is to see more wisely, not to perceive less deeply, but to engage more consciously with what you perceive. Jung wrote about his patient from 1913, the introverted intuitive who came to him during his own psychological crisis. After 3 years of working with Jung's individuation process, her life transformed completely. She learned to distinguish between her own psychological contents and what she absorbed from others. She found work where her differentiated perception helped troubled individuals. She built relationships with people who valued her insights rather than fearing them. Most importantly, she stopped experiencing her superior perception as a curse and began understanding it as a gift requiring conscious development. Jung wrote that the patient learned not to see less, but to see more wisely, not to perceive less deeply, but to engage more consciously with what she perceived. Her gift remained intact, but her relationship to it became integrated rather than overwhelming. This represents Jung's ultimate insight. Some individuals are born with consciousness that exceeds collective readiness. This advanced perception will either destroy them through isolation and overwhelm, or transform them into exactly what humanity needs for its psychological evolution. Your superior perception isn't a malfunction in your psychological makeup. It's an advanced feature of consciousness development. You're not broken because you see everything others miss. You're psychologically ahead of your time. The question isn't whether you should suppress your perception to fit in with collective unconsciousness. The question is whether you'll develop the individuation skills necessary to integrate your perception consciously. Jung's individuation method offers a path from dangerous isolation to conscious service, from overwhelming perception to integrated wisdom, from psychological curse to evolutionary contribution. You were born to see everything, not to suffer in silence, but to serve consciousness evolution. The world needs your insights, but it needs them delivered with the integration, wisdom, and strategic awareness that transform dangerous perception into cultural medicine. Your gift is not your burden. Your unconscious relationship to your gift is your burden. Learn to integrate it consciously, and you become exactly what Jung believed highly perceptive individuals were meant to be. Consciousness pioneers, preparing humanity for psychological development that is inevitable but not yet obvious. Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't that some people see everything. It's that most people who see everything never learn to use what they see wisely. The danger isn't in the perception itself, but in failing to develop conscious relationship with extraordinary abilities. You are not too much for this world. You are exactly what consciousness evolution requires. Once you learn to wield your perception as consciously as Jung learned to wield his, the danger of seeing everything isn't that you see too much. It's that you might never learn to see with the integration and wisdom your gifts demand. If you recognize yourself in Jung's description of the highly perceptive individual, you're part of a rare psychological type that Jung believed essential for consciousness evolution. Drop a comment below sharing which stage of integration you're currently in. Your individuation journey connects with others walking the same path, and if you found this exploration valuable, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into Jung's discoveries about psychological development that transcends collective unconscious limitations. Because the world doesn't need more broken empaths. It needs more awakened ones, and Jung's research proves that transformation is not only possible, It's inevitable. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.